This podcast contains spoilers, so listen at your own risk or call back after you've watched the movie.
You know who you call. Leave a message. Maybe they'll call you back. Then again, maybe they won't.
We're having ourselves quite a little game of phone tag here.
Ring. I usually get this guy's answering machine.
I'll call you right back.
If you're there, please pick up the phone. I really want to talk to you.
I check my fucking messages every day when I come home from work. My answering machine, zero. I got a blinking light.
All I have to do is pick up this phone right here, inform the cinema, and your plan's kaput.
No, I ain't got no phone. I had to pull, because people calling all the time, and who needs the aggravation, right? Interruptions.
Right, I've just watched A Month in the Country in honor of Father's Day, since it is your favorite movie, and from the look of the cover, I wouldn't have watched it under any other circumstances. So I thought it'd be a nice thing to watch your favorite movie and get to talk to you about it for Father's Day. Now, whether you'll get back to me in time for that, or whether you know how to use a voice note technology on WhatsApp, or things that will have to be sorted afterwards. Maybe Louise or someone that's more tech savvy than yourself can teach you how to hold down a voice note button. And I'm not being patronizing when I say there is a way. If you just push the up button, and then you don't have to have your hand on the button, and you can just talk indefinitely. So hopefully that will help. So yeah, saw this afternoon. I know you asked me to get it for you a few months ago, and I did, and it wasn't the best copy, but I have since tracked down a much better copy. I don't know if you're going to rewatch the movie or you just know it off by heart, but you now have a copy of that much more crisper copy. And it's funny, in reading about this movie, there was a very bad copy in 1987, and I think the prints were lost, and there was just a very bad copy around, which makes sense because when I was trying to track down a copy for you, it was really hard to find. But funnily enough, a fan in 2004, which I presume isn't you, tracked down the prints and restored it. So the version I watched is lovely print, and just probably how it should be seen, and probably how you're going to get the most out of this movie. Now, I probably have a few questions for you to begin with there. As I walk around this park, I'm doing a few laps every day for this kayak trip that I have coming up. So if I sound more out of breath, it's because I've been doing more laps as this voice note continues. But yeah, just a few questions. So I presume you have read the book before this movie. I could be wrong. And I'm almost 100% sure you told me that it is your favorite movie of all time. Now, I could have that wrong as well. But so first of all, in terms of the movie, how do you think the movie adapted the book? Obviously, famously, when movies are often adapted from a book, it has often pacing issues. It has often problems cramming in so many pages and trying to get it to fit the thread and the narrative themes and just what books we're getting at. I'm talking generally here now. But one thing I felt about A Month in the Country, that it does do a good job of feeling like the passage of time and the passage of all these ideas, which there are many, flow very well on film. I guess it helps that it's set over a summer. I know it's called A Month in the Country, but it's actually set over 6 months, or not 6 months, over the summer holidays anyway. So I don't know in the book if it's a smaller time frame and they expanded it for the movie. I don't know. But yeah, so just talking on the presumption of, like I'm talking to somebody who has watched the movie and read the book. What do you think the movie has done to justify it being a movie? I suppose not that it needs to be justified, but I know often people, when they see movies of their books, they're disappointed by it. What do you think this movie captures well from the book? What do you think this movie doesn't get right from the book? And is there any changes that were made from the book to the movie? Now, from my point of view, in terms of a movie, it at times looked very televisual, which I'm not overly a fan of when I see this type of aesthetic. And I think the director, Pat O'Connor, he's directed a few movies. He's directed Dancing with Lunasa. So yeah, immediately how this movie is packaged from an aesthetic point of view, at least in a directing sense, it felt very flat to me. Now, the movie did begin to work on me. And so, first of all, this is a very young Colin Firth performance. It's a very young Kenneth Branagh performance. I think it's Colin Firth's first lead performance. I think he was in 3 movies before that. And I think it might be Kenneth Branagh's first, but it's like I've come across them as either directors or much later in the career. So it is quite striking to see them very youthful. But yeah, this movie opens in I think it's a flashback to World War One. Colin Firth having a dream, and he's very, I guess they would have called it shell-shocked back then. And yeah, this is another very interesting thing for me about this movie, and the things that began to win me over, despite the type of aesthetic, which eventually almost complemented it. But yeah, I think the book, it's written in 1980 and the movie itself came out in 1987. Now, I don't know how much language would have been used around PTSD or even mental health at the time this was even written or the movie was even filmed. I think they probably would have used the word shell-shocked back then. But even setting aside the time in which the book and the movie were written and filmed, the setting itself of this movie, they certainly wouldn't have had the language, and they certainly wouldn't have known what's going on with these characters, which is interesting as well, because we see a lot of World War One movies, and we see a lot of movies in America maybe after World War One and World War Two, where the people come back from the war, they're scared, they get into crime usually in these American movies. But I'm not sure I've seen many English movies and what happened, the English soldiers who came back and when they're trying to integrate back into society. And I think that's a very unique thing about this movie as well. I also like movies set in quiet rural settings and over almost either around a very specific thing, in this, which is the church, or in a very specific area, which is the village itself. And I like that. And I think also, coming from Ireland, and you'll know yourself from living in 2 villages I know of in Ireland, the history of Irish villages is, you can see the poverty, and then you can see some things like, well, we grew up, what was it, Ivor's Mansion, or these like farmhouses, and you saw a very big contrast in wealth distribution and whatnot. But in this English village, it's a very, what you would class as a well-to-do village. It's not so much that people are struggling in an economical sense. They're struggling in an internal sense. So yeah, I think what this movie gets right, and what eventually drew me into the movie, was I think the characters are very interesting. I think the setting is very interesting. I think the symbolism is very interesting. And I think all those things work really well and draw you in. It's a very quiet movie. It's a very subtle movie. It's a movie that doesn't have these long, loud confrontations. It's very much what is not said in this movie. And yeah, I think that's great. And I think in the book, this probably was explored even more. And it's also got a really good score that's in contrast often to almost the niceness and the quaintness and the sun-dripped long summer charm of the village. There's this really foreboding score that echoes in and out at times. And I think that is a composer. I can't remember his name, unfortunately, but he actually did the song. I don't remember that snowman thing that comes around Christmas. The snowman, you know, we're walking in the air. Yeah, that. He composed that whole musical, and that's probably his most famous works. But I don't think. I think he's getting his flowers now a lot later in terms of how good of a composer he was and the type of orchestra genius he was. That's what I've been reading anyway. But yeah, in this, I think the score is very good and it complements it very well. So yeah, another subgenre of movies that I really like as well is, and maybe this is something maybe men can relate to, even men like I'd say myself and yourself, who are well able to express our emotions. And certainly what I've always got from you is you're very much able to express your emotions and how you're feeling. But regardless of that, there is something you can relate to either in yourself or just from observing and hanging around with men in general as well. And that's almost in this case, it's, I would say, it's repression in terms of the emotions and what both the Kenneth Branagh character and the Colin Firth character needed to bury emotionally in order to survive. And I think we see this a lot in movies, predominantly starring Casey Affleck. I know I sent you one the other day called Dreamin' Wild, the music one, where he shows up a lot later in life, and his music from when he's a teenager almost gets a second life, and we have to see him navigate being burnt out, having life not exactly go how he intended it to, and navigating, trying to connect with the feelings that spawned that amazing music. And I think another Casey Affleck movie is in Manchester by the Sea. I don't know if you've seen that, but yeah, that type of thing where a guy is in either a self-inflicting hole, or they're just unable to articulate their emotions or express themselves, and then seeing that journey where they go on that journey to try and bridge the gap between whatever a level of emotional expression or emotional intelligence that they're able to have throughout these movies. I find very fascinating, and I think this movie does that very well with Colin Firth. And I think even the symbolism that we have in this, now I haven't read the book and I'd be interested to get your opinion on all this, but so we have a character in Colin Firth who's come back from World War One. He's going from this city in London to this town, I guess in Yorkshire or something, I don't know, from the accents, and there's a few dodgy accents from the children, I must say, in this movie. And what's he tasked with doing? He's tasked with going into a church, and he's not painting something. He's unearthing something that's been buried for so long in the past, and he's trying to interpret what's in front of him. He's trying to slowly unveil. He's trying to just almost perfect a masterpiece that isn't even him, or isn't even his. And I think that mirrors the human experience, and it certainly mirrors the turmoil of these characters in this movie, and it works really well. And then we have the Moon character played by Kenneth Branagh, and what's he doing? He's another person from World War I that survived and very much intact. And what's he doing? He's an archaeologist that's trying to make sense of the past. So there's all these characters who embedded themselves in fields, literally in Kenneth Branagh's case, fields and roles and jobs where they're trying to unearth something. They're trying to make sense of something from a different time, based on their own experiences, and based on experiences that have nothing got to do with them, as they try and unearth this mystery of who this painter was, and who Kenneth Branagh is trying to find this body. And I think that mystery paid off very well in a way that I didn't expect. That was quite rewarding. And then you also have this other thing going on, and that is, almost not to sound too like reading into stuff too much, because I think it is there in this movie, but I think there's almost the interpretation of the reality you're in, and what you see isn't always what you get, because we have this vicar character who he's very reluctant to pay Colin Firth. He's meant to represent the man of Christ. He's meant to be very religious, and he's a cheapskate. He lives in a massive house. He's almost the opposite of what he represents. And then Colin Firth, the family that's nice to him, is not, I think they're non-believers actually, and so they're full of the qualities that the religion that they don't believe in preaches. And then we have a literal preacher who isn't inhibiting any of those values that he gathers people around. So I think that's really good as well. And then there's certainly this type of thing where what you interpret around you is your religion, or more accurately, I think, from someone who's agnostic, because I know you're not, so you might have had a different interpretation of this. But for me, it's almost like what you see around you is your spirituality. The scenes where he feels quite empty in the church, and the preacher is preaching to the sermon, he's like, yeah, fuck this shit. And this scene's then when he's just lying down, and the sun is shining on him, and then the sun manifests into the Natasha Richardson character. And then there's moments where the sun is beaming down the countryside, and then you can see beauty, and you can see, if you want to call it God, or you just want to call it something that can give you spiritual sustenance all around you, not necessarily in the places where you might find it. And it's also one person's heaven is another person's hell. And there's great scenes like that when he's in this wood, which the Natasha Richardson character says early on in the movie that she feels like her house is the only thing that is protecting her from the trees almost crushing in on her. And obviously that's got to do with her situation. She's in an unhappy marriage. And this is where the economical consistency of this movie works well, because you can't point to anything else except how the mind interprets what's around them, I guess. So yeah, in one scene she's talking about how the wood is literally a foreboding thing that feels like it will crush her, but in the next scene she goes to the wood with Colin Firth, who she has a completely different type of connection with, and she's happy, and it just goes to show you it's how your mind, I guess, interacts with the senses based on your history, based on your present, based on your mindset, that will interpret what you see. I think there's a lot of that in this movie as well. And of course, that scene is rubber stamped by Colin Firth saying, I think he says something along the lines of, yeah, this wood is heaven. And then a gun fires off, and he basically really regresses momentarily because it reminds him of a gunshot. And then I think he says something along the lines of, you like, I can't remember what he says, but he says something like, oh, it's my own fault for calling this paradise because you can't have paradise without the hell, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing, but he's basically saying that this location is no longer that because he's been reminded of what he's been through. So there's lots of scenes like that, and there's even scenes where this little girl, he goes to visit her, and then I think she's definitely going to die, and she says, oh, I want to see the picture when I feel better, whatever she says. And then the children are like, she's definitely going to die. And there is a type of thing of not acknowledging your reality in one sense in order to function and in order to keep on going, even though if the inevitable is not far from you. So there's a lot of that in this movie as well. And I also like we find out that the Moon character in the World War One is, he basically for 6 months he wasn't on the front line, and it's found out, I think it's hinted at, that he's gay by one of the soldiers. And I like that Colin Firth doesn't confront him and he almost lets him talk. I think in a lesser movie there would be a big scene confrontation wise in that, but yeah, he just lets him talk. And there's plenty of moments like that, and there's also plenty of moments where every character gets a moment. Like even the vicar gets a moment where he says, oh, you judge me, but you don't know what it's like from my perspective. So the movie does give everyone's perspective in very quiet ways, which I really liked. And I thought the ending was really powerful, really emotional. It took me a minute to figure out what was going on, where Colin Firth, he leaves the church and then there's an old guy walking into the church, and I didn't realize it was him to begin with. I don't know how this is portrayed in the book, but yeah, all of a sudden this is now old Colin Firth looking back at where young Colin Firth left, while young Colin Firth looks at something that hasn't happened yet. And it's a very difficult thing to pull off. And it's almost like that, I can't remember what it is. Is it that T.S. Eliot poem where it's talking about death, where you'll go and visit something for the first time and you'll go back to the darkness again or something. I'm butchering it now, but you'll go back to darkness and you'll know it for the first time, but you've already known it in a way. And I think this movie in that end scene does that in a different sense, where now he's going back to something that is now his history and is now his archaeology, and there's an older version of him looking back at Colin Firth in that time. And it could be something that's done hokey, and it could be something that doesn't work, but I think it actually works very well in this, and it's a very powerful image, and what it says about the passage of time and how you bring your experiences on you, looking back at your own experiences, and you're almost two different people looking at two different versions of you by storing all this history and storing all this emotion and storing this journey in your mind. So yeah, definitely ended on a high as well. So yeah, I'm glad that I've seen it. I'm anxious to hear, well, not anxious, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts should you be able to figure out how to use a voice note.
Testing, 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 testing. Right, as regards Month of the Country being my favourite film, You referred to the fact that I read the book, and how did the movie compare with the book? Well, I haven't read the book actually. I intend reading the book, so I will read the book. That'll be interesting because generally, when you read the book first, you construct identities and faces around the characters, and then when you see them in a film with the actors and who they are playing the parts, the identities are kind of constructed for you, which can often lead to disappointment. So for me, before I read the book, I will already have visions of Kenneth Branagh and Colin Firth as the characters that I'm reading. So it'll be a different experience, because I won't be imagining the characters. I will be referring to the movie when I read the book. So that should be interesting. I won't say I won't be disappointed, or I'm not saying I will be disappointed. I don't know, because generally books are longer and the narrative is more written down rather than visual. So that should be interesting. The two characters are interesting because Colin Firth, who plays Birkin, is traumatized by his war experiences. He is married, but he doesn't seem to be able to go back to his wife and resume the lifestyle he had. So this is kind of an intermission before he goes back to his marriage, which we get the impression from him was not a very happy one. And then we have Kenneth Branagh, who plays Moon, who is a different character. He's much more jovial, much more flippant, but both of them have suffered the same trauma, and both of them seem to be processing it through the medium of exploration in the church. We have Patrick McAleese, who is the Reverend Quiche, who is a very reserved, austere person, and who does not approve of, definitely he does not approve of what Birkin is doing with his uncovering a mural in the church, which I'll discuss later on. And then we have Natasha Richardson, who plays Alice Quiche, the Reverend Quiche's wife, who seems to be a much more spiritual and worldly person and does not seem to share her husband's austere manner. And what I liked about the film is it's a kind of a paradox. Both characters are trying to uncover and discover something that lays buried, but they're also trying to bury their own trauma and their own experience of war. So they're using the idea of uncovering what lays hidden to try and hide their own trauma. So there's a kind of a dual paradox going on. It's interesting, both characters are involved in actions. They're involved in doing something. They're involved in a project. They're involved in a slow process of uncovering something. And I sometimes think that we locate ourselves by our actions, by what we do. So we locate who we are by the activities we do. So sometimes the actual act of doing something, writing, art, sport, those actions lead to thoughts which tell us kind of who we are. So I think there's an awful lot of what would be the word? Therapy in what they're doing, because they can focus on an action and they're not left alone to their thoughts. So when these people are left on, especially at night, when they're on their own and they're not doing any actions, they seem to be, that's when it's most traumatic for them. The film too, it's the ordinariness and the mundaneness. They find themselves among people in a village which is very light, very quiet, leads, the pace of life is pretty much as it's been for years and years. It has a slow, systematic rhythm of ordinariness and mundaneness. And these two characters, because of what they've seen and what they've experienced, it's just below the surface, the real terror, the real horror of war, that really beneath that really civilization and peace is a very thin film or skin over what actually can happen in the world, which is war, death. I like the girl. She's the little child that's in the bed, and she has tuberculosis, and it's pretty obvious that she's going to die. So this is kind of the character. Birkin comes face to face with death and unfairness, but this is nobody's fault. This is just a tragedy that no one has control over. And even when there's war, that kind of unfairness and tragedy is something that has to be faced. And in the film, the characters, the two children that bring Burke into the child, they are they're taking it in their stride. They're almost blending this horrific event of this child dying so young, blending it into the ordinariness and mundane kind of pace of their life, but it makes horrors about death resurface in Birkin's mind, so he can't confront it. The Reverend Quiche, he does not like the idea of exposing this mural because he thinks it will distract from the congregation from the words and the sermons, which is actually why it was covered over in the first place, because during the Protestant Reformation, they didn't want any pictures, any murals, statues in the church, because they were considered a distraction and worship of idols. So that would have been why they were covered over in the first place. So he's recovering them, and the Reverend Quiche does not want this because it's going to distract. And he feels he in a way is fighting against the mundanity and ordinariness in the village life in a different way, because to him, people are so focused on the ordinary and the rhythm and the routine of life. He wants to raise their consciousness to theology and the meaning of God and life after death and all this. And he feels he's struggling, and as he says, he doesn't want Birkin to judge him, which he is kind of judging him, because he's looking upon him as, not really knowing anything about real life and death, that he's kind of sheltered from it. But the Reverend Quiche feels that he is actually fighting his own battle, his own war. And his wife, she seems to, we don't know how they got together, we don't know why they got married, but she seems to just got in step with his psyche, with his way of thinking. She's just gone through the motions, because she's actually much more into nature and spirituality, and which is why she hits it off with Birkin. I think there's always below the surface, there's strong feelings that are kept just below the surface. She, because of her position, and he, for maybe he just doesn't want to step over the line. But spiritually and psychologically, she seems to have a lot more in common with Birkin than she does her own Reverend Keith. So this tension and this sexual kind of tension between the two of them, which is kept totally under control even to the end, is always present in the film. And as for the walk in the forest, where there's all this beauty and lovely nature, and it's shattered by a gunshot and an animal getting killed. So again, Birkin is aware that the surface of civilization and peace and all this ordinariness below the surface, there is this horrible, horrible savagery in the world, which he has experienced. So I just like the ordinariness of it's not like the American films where somebody comes back from war and they're either a drug addict or they're in some tough neighborhood and they're using their combat skills to create right injustices in the neighborhood, or they go into crime because they feel that the establishment has let them down. This is just ordinary, and it's probably the way it was for these people that came back from war or do come back from war. They re-enter a quiet, ordinary, calm pace of life, but they're bringing back with them the inner turmoil. My favorite part is the bit where Birkin finishes, he uncovers the mural, and of course we find that the guy that painted the mural had converted to Islam and he couldn't be buried in church ground. So he was buried outside the church ground, and Moon discovers that's Moon. Moon is locating this aristocrat or somebody very high up in the. He's been tasked with the force of finding this skeleton that they know was not buried on church grounds, but we know that the reason for that was that he had converted Islam, and somebody else finished the mural, and it's uncovered at the end that he falls off of the scaffolding and kills himself. Well, by accident, I presume, and he's not. So the mural is uncovered, the body is discovered, or the skeleton is uncovered, and also the question mark as to why he was not buried on church ground is also uncovered. I love the part where he sees himself. He enters the church as an old man, and the mural is still there. And then he sees himself walking away through the fields after completing the task, and he's revisiting the church. And there's the echoes of the children in the church playing the music. And of course, the mural is still there, and it will be there long after he's dead, which is kind of the case of art or literature or something. You're leaving remnants of your presence behind you. And the poem you actually picked by T.S. Eliot is from a group of poems called The Four Seasons. And what he says is, we shall not cease from our exploration, and at the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started from and know the place for the first time. So that is that. That's a good. That is a good poem or a line to kind of describe what is actually happening in the end of it, where he's leaving. He's leaving and he's kind of arriving at the same time, but at a later date. So I suppose I like it because being interested in art, even though he wasn't painting the mural, he was uncovering it and recreating it, and there was a kind of an art in what he's doing, and the action of creating or rediscovering the art. He kind of located himself. He kind of located who he was, and there was a healing in the doing, and he kind of regained some control over who he was. He kind of relocated who he was through the act. So that's basically it. I'll send this to you now. Hopefully you'll get it.
Yeah, your voice note did successfully get sent to me, which is good. Yeah, very interesting thoughts and observations there, things that I hadn't considered. It's funny, like you're saying, this is your favorite movie, and I can see so much of like not you and the characters, but just you in your, I don't know if belief system is the right word, but in how you see and observe the world within this movie, as in devoting yourself to a craft, observing things around you that might be considered mundane to other people, religious in a spiritual way more than a doctrine way, which is also present in this movie as well. So it's funny. I think the movie came out in 1987. I can't remember when you were born. 1964. So you would have been 32 or something like that. It's funny with these movies. My friend Michael, his favorite movie is It's a Wonderful Life, and I can see so much of how he sees the world evident in that movie, and it makes me wonder sometimes, do movies like this shape who you are when you see them at pivotal times in your life, or do people already have the foundation of this, and then you see movies like this and it almost cements something about what you believe? I don't know. But yeah, I didn't know you hadn't read the book as well, and it's interesting as well because, like you said, if you do read the book now, not only will you be imagining Colin Firth and Kenneth Branagh, but you will also be hearing their voices when the lines are being read and probably seeing their movements. So in that sense, you're going to have a completely different experience of the book. But from what a lot of people said, from what I read online anyway, and in reviews and whatnot, a lot of people are very happy with how they put this book on screen. But I guess you'll never get that kind of authentic experience. I like what you said as well about a lot of times you find out who you are by what you do. And like you said, there's a type of art that the Colin Firth character does in this movie, but technically he's not an artist. He's almost unveiling something that's forgotten and keeping something alive, really. But it struck me as well what you're saying, that these characters needed something to focus on, so they can't be alone with their thoughts. And like you said, at nighttime, that's when it's worse for them. And sometimes they almost need an accomplice to work out their thoughts so it's not overwhelming. And that accomplice is the unveiling of the painting and the archaeology in the moon character. Then it got me wondering, I wonder, do we also see that in the priest, in the scene where he's in this big mansion? It's quite hollow and barren, as described by Natasha Richardson character. But where do we find him? We find him at the corner of this room, the only room where he's really done anything with. And what's he doing? He's playing music, so he's almost devoting himself, even though he is the man of religion, you can imagine that he is also with his thoughts in those moments and doing a similar thing that Colin Firth and Kenneth Branagh are doing, perhaps as well. And the other thing as well, it struck me also that, like you mentioned, that they find out about themselves, and Colin Firth is able to go back into society. And well, I'm not so sure in the case of him, and it's a complicated one, because in the case of the characters themselves, what does Moon say when he goes? Moon says he's going to, I think, Cairo, or I can't remember where he said he's going now, but he leaves us by going somewhere else to continue on his archaeology. So he is continuing, if you will, his therapy, and he's not changing what he's doing. And Colin Firth doesn't normally do something like the job he has. Well, actually, maybe he does, because he goes around and he seems to have worked in other churches, but nothing like this. But what does he end up doing at the end? He ends up going back to his wife, which is what he always does. So there is another theme here of people doing what they always do as well. So the Natasha Richardson character, what does she do? She doesn't profess her love for Colin Firth, and she goes back to her husband. And there is this type of thing where it comes with the mundaneness. You wonder, from the outside observer, does it look like none of these characters are changing, or they're almost stuck in a pattern and stuck in a loop of doing what they always do? But then there's this whole amount of introspection and growing that is an internal thing that only the characters really know. It's almost locked off to the audience, and it's unusual for a movie as well, where if you're talking about character journeys, nothing really has changed, and they've all ended up back at square one. But like you said, they've definitely done some mental work along the way by doing these actions. So even while repeating your actions, you can learn something about yourself as well. But whether that can be turned into long-term change or actionable change, I think the movie's verdict, well, I guess you can read into it whichever way you want. And like you mentioned, the end scene where the unveiling of the art that he did years and years ago is still there. I think there's another thing at play as well. It's not just the mural. I think when we see the old Birkin go into the church, he remembers the two children that were there while he was working on it. But if you want to flip that, you could say that he is also remembered in the church long after he's gone, at least while people like the children are alive. And maybe Dave, he's become part of the story of the painter who's come and unveiled the painting of the Muslim guy. So even within his actions, he's become part of the lore of the church. So it's not just the painting that remains, it's almost the thing that would become the mythology of the actions he's done as well. We've all grown up in villages and things like that and heard about stories of people that you've never met, and long after they've gone, and they're almost kept alive through stories and the lore that's attached to the actions they did. So yeah, there's a lot to analyze and think about with this movie, which I like.
In response to your last ideas about my response to your critique of what I said, I start off anyway by saying I was born in 1957, not 1964. So you've knocked a few years off my age, which if it was in factual, I would be happy about, but unfortunately, saying it doesn't make it happen. Number two, you describe, and which I think is interesting, that when we look at these movies and they leave such an impression on us, is it a road to Damascus moment when all of a sudden reevaluate everything and look at life differently? Or are we just responding to something or an attitude to life or theories or ideas about life that we already have? And we just see them reinforced when we see a story like this, that it kind of confirms or we recognize ourselves in this narrative. And it puts me in mind when you said that there's a theory by a psychologist and philosopher called Jack Lacan, and he talks about the mirror theory. And in it, what it describes is that between maybe 6 months, 18 months, maybe 2 years of age, that the child, the baby, sees itself in the mirror and for the first time recognizes itself as an independent entity from the mother. So for the first time, it realizes this reflection is me, but it's not really you because it's an image of you. When you see the image in a mirror, no more than a photograph or a painting, you just see the image, the outer shell. And for the child, it becomes an idealized version of yourself, not yourself. And this kind of leads to alienation, this image of yourself that, is only the outer shell. It doesn't kind of, the you that thinks, the you that feels. And it's used in film theory, where that we're in the cinema and we suspend belief in what we're watching. Like we become totally engrossed, which is why, if there's a frightening scene, we get frightened, or if we feel sympathy for the character, we feel sympathy like we would somebody we met or somebody we meet in flesh and blood. So we engage in the film as if it's real, so we suspend our disbelief. But where the mirror theory comes in is that when we watch these films, we kind of find ourselves in the character. We're made to identify with the character in a sympathetic way, usually, or an anti-aggressive way. But if the character already reinforces what we already feel, like the Colin Firth in The Month of the Country, you said that you saw a lot of me in him and the idea of it. So you're probably right. So that it was like a mirror image, and I begin to identify with the character, and I kind of recognize myself, and which is probably why it leaves such an impression. It isn't that it changes, in my case anyway, what I believed or makes me reevaluate everything. It more or less confirms, or I recognize myself like the child in the mirror, which is why, because I hadn't thought about the Reverend Quiche, the way in the house he plays music, and this is his action, this is where he finds himself. I'd forgotten that because of all the characters in the play, in the film, he's the one I least identified with. I kind of identified to a certain extent with all the rest, but he's the one that I least was sympathetic to or recognize myself in. So that would kind of reinforce that you find yourself, or you kind of look for yourself in the narrative. Yeah, it's true. Nothing changes. They all go back. But the thing with films and narratives, if they're true, or if this was a real life story, you have the author who writes the narrative and who has a reason for writing the narrative. And he constructs a window into their lives. And it's like, if you can imagine a garden with one or two mirrors. Sorry, maybe 3 windows, and each window allows you a view of the garden that the other windows don't allow you. So if you're looking in one window, you see trees. Maybe in another window, you see a rock pool, but they're all in the same garden. So we're being shown a window into their lives, which is their constructed lives. But the author or the producer is giving us a look in at one particular window, one particular short time in their life. But this short time in their lives kind of sums up their whole lives, who they are and what they are. So, yeah, they go back to being what they are. And maybe this particular section of their life, this month in the country, changes their life or helps them move on into their life or sets them on a new course. But it's a window into just a short view that's constructed by the author of this life. And we don't know much about him before we see this window. And we certainly don't know what happens after they leave this view through the window. But as you say, they go back to being or doing what they've already done, which is pretty much what they must have been like before we met them. And then when they leave the window or the view or the narrative that's been constructed around them, we assume that they're going to go back to or do something different to what they were before. But we don't see that. We only have this short window, this short view into their lives. And that's the same even if it's a true story. We don't see everything, but this is a fictional account of characters. Possibly the author knew people like this, maybe not, and they're constructed from different people he knew. But we just see this short window into an event, into their lives. And while the camera's rolling, while the film is going on, we're in a cinema or we're at home. And we believe what we're seeing is true because we get so invested in the story. And we're kind of constructed to sympathize with the characters, but if you really are like the characters, it's so much more easy to, like Lacan's mirror image, you see yourself. It's an image of you, but it's not you. It's not totally you. So and that theory is used a lot in film studies, the Lacan theory and the ideal viewer. But I think I got so sympathetic to it because I kind of already felt those things about what was going on in the film, but I wouldn't have been thinking in terms of people recovering from shell shock in World War One. It could be a different narrative. It could be a fictional life of an artist that suffers for his art, but you see a kind of a fable or a narrative that you recognize yourself in, and it's so much more easy to identify with in the film. So I think that's probably why I was so involved in it, and found myself so sympathetic, and I could watch it over and over again because each time you kind of look at it, depending on what age you are or depending on your life experiences between each viewing, you identify with yourself, but maybe each time you look at it, maybe you've changed, maybe you've had different experiences, and when you look at it and you recognize yourself in it again, maybe it's a different you that you're recognizing, or slightly different each time you watch it, but each time you watch it, you're identifying with this you, but maybe this you has progressed since the last you that watched it but overall, you haven't changed that much, and your thoughts and your principles about life and your theories about life don't change. Maybe they alter, but yeah, you see yourself in it, or you recognize the character, or you sympathize with the character each time you watch it. But maybe you slightly altered, and each time you watch it, the character is slightly altered because you're identifying yourself with it, which has kind of changed as well. So each time you watch it, you're identifying with maybe a slightly different self, depending when you were 20 or whether you're 50 or whether you're 60, because your psyche changes. So yeah, that's basically it. That would be the way. If you want the spelling of the Jack Lacan, JACQUES LACAN. So Jack Lacan. Anyway, it's the theory, the mirror theory, but it's not constructed for film theory, but film theorists do include it in their critiques of film, especially Alfred Hitchcock and all these films, with the ideal gaze of the male gaze and the omnipotent viewer and all that. But I won't go into that. Anyway, that's it.
Yeah, I'll definitely look that up. Thanks very much. The Arthur J.L. Carr, he was saying that most of the characters in the book, at least, which I haven't read, so I can only presume the film, is based on people he knows and his family. So maybe it's semi-autobiographical. But yeah, what you're saying as well about identifying with the characters at different ages, and there's so much you can get from it each time you watch it. It probably ends up in one way when you're watching it at a certain age, you're identifying with Colin Firth when he's a youngin doing the church work, and then maybe at the age you're at now, maybe you're looking back in the same way that the older John Birkin is. So yeah, I can see why there's so much in this film for you, and yeah, I liked it. Thought it was decent enough. But yeah, anyway, thanks for that.
Your mailbox is full. Please delete new or stored messages which you no longer need so that new messages may be received.